What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my top 36 rookie rankings after the NFL draft. The day 3 ended, I went through my top 24. I have made, a few changes here and there within those top 24, and then also added on 12 new players. So running through my top 36 with tiers. This is going to be super flex and tight end premium, so keep that in mind. If you guys have any fantasy questions, drop them down below, and I'd also love to hear your feedback on these rankings. Who's too high? Who's too low, who are some kind of later round sleepers you guys are looking at. But let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off in tier 1. It's going to be Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm pretty firm on having Caleb Williams as my number 1 overall and then having Marvin Harrison Jr. as my number 2. I just think Caleb Williams, being this elite quarterback prospect, going into a great situation with how valuable quarterbacks are in Superflex, I feel like he's got to go there at the 101. And then for Marvin Harrison Jr., I had him and Malik Neighbors really close together talent-wise, but he just has the far better landing spot, so he's my locked-in 102. Now shifting into tier 2, it's going to be Malik Neighbors, and then Jaden Daniels and Drake May. I think in my top 24 I put out a couple days ago, I had Malik Neighbors right behind Jaden Daniels. I ended up bumping him back up to my number 3 overall player. He didn't get the great landing spot, but he's still a top tier prospect. And we've even seen some of these young wide receivers who maybe have landed in poor situations that have showcased their talent. Their value doesn't really fall off a ton. Like Garrett Wilson's still valued as a top 24 Dynasty asset, even though he hasn't put together like an elite fantasy ceiling, because people understand he hasn't been in good situations. He's had poor quarterback play. So as long as Malik Neighbors is flashing his talent, even if he's not like a top 12 guy in year 1 or year 2, I think people will still value him very highly for Dynasty. And then we have the back-to-back quarterbacks. I really could go either way on these two with Jaden Daniels and Drake May. I don't think either of them got like an elite landing spot. I'd probably say Jaden Daniels' landing spot is slightly better than Drake May's, but it's not like either of them are going to like a bear situation or like JJ McCarthy with the Vikings. They both have rushing upside. So honestly, like you could really go either way with those two. I do think that Jaden Daniels is probably going to go first more often than not in most rookie drafts. Now shifting into tier 3, I think in my original top 24, I just had tier 2 and tier 3 combined, but I do think there's a little bit of a break. So in tier 3, I'm going with JJ McCarthy, Brock Bowers, and Rome Odunze. I did jump JJ McCarthy over Brock Bowers and Rome Odunze. I just think looking at it, this is such a great landing spot. He's paired with a very sharp offensive mind and Kevin O'Connell. You have great weapons with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. He really has just been put in a great situation to succeed as a starter. And we know quarterbacks are super valuable in Superflex. Even if he may not have the highest ceiling, I still think he can pay off here, and I would take him here at the 106. If you wanted to go Bowers or Rome Odunze, I'm not going to push back super hard. They're in the same tier for a reason. So McCarthy's going to be my 106. Then Brock Bowers is going to be my 107. And I know the landing spot sucks. I'm, totally willing to admit that. Going to the Raiders, it was not expected, and it's not a great, outcome from the draft, but he's just such an elite talent at the tight end position. It's a lot tougher to find those super high ceiling tight ends than it is to find like a high ceiling wide receiver, and I still think like Rome Odunze is the wide receiver 3 in this class. He could be the wide receiver 1 in weaker classes. But man, Brock Bowers is just such a top talent at the tight end position. I think also when we're looking at Rome Odunze, I like this landing spot long term with the Bears and Caleb Williams, but in the short term, it's not all that great with DJ Moore there and Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift. There's a lot of target competition early on. So like Bowers isn't in a great situation right now, but Rome Odunze isn't exactly in like a pristine spot for like year 1 or year 2. So they're very close, like I said, but I would slightly lean Bowers, but I would imagine most would probably prefer Rome Odunze at this spot. And then looking at tier 4, a 4-man tier, we're going with Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Jonathan Brooks, and Bo Nix. I think this is the tier that gained a lot of value after the draft. A lot of these landing spots and draft capital really hit for these players. So starting off here with Xavier Worthy, I really liked him as a prospect. I just wanted the NFL to kind of back that up and see him get that round 1 draft capital. That came through. Great landing spot with the Chiefs. He was an early breakout in college, a great freshman season, and then 2 solid ones after that. So I love the situation here post-draft for Xavier Worthy. I think he has a decent opportunity to be their wide receiver 1, and that's why I have him leading this tier. Then right behind him, we're going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. just a really nice landing spot here with the Jaguars. I did drop him below Xavier Worthy after the draft. It's nothing, negative against Brian Thomas Jr. It's just that the draft went so well for Xavier Worthy. And then we're going to have our first running back here with Jonathan Brooks, and he gets the nice mid-round 2 draft capital, goes to the Panthers. I think this is a landing spot where he has realistic workhorse upside. I don't think any of the other running backs in this class, I don't think it's a super realistic outcome for them to become 3-down workhorses, especially early on with their teams. I do think, that's in the cards here for Jonathan Brooks, as long as he's recovering well from that ACL. So I like him here in the first round. And then I believe my 112 here is going to be Bo Nix. And I feel like Bo Nix is probably going to end up being a value in rookie drafts. I'd consider him as high as the 111. I could go back and forth with him and Jonathan Brooks. Could also just come down to team need at that point. But I feel like in fantasy drafts, he's probably going to be falling to the second round pretty consistently. I know a lot of people didn't love him as a prospect, a little bit of an older quarterback prospect. But I mean, getting 12th overall draft capital, also going to Sean Payton's offense, it's a pretty decent spot to be in. And I think Bo Nix is going to be a value if he's falling anywhere in the second round. It's also just going to be pretty much impossible any other year to get a quarterback with that type of capital, outside the first round. Those dudes are always locked in, probably early to mid first round. So I think the fact that this is a pretty strong quarterback class, it opens things up here for you to get a discount on a guy like Bo Nix. And that's going to wrap up tier 4. Looking at tier 5, 2 wide receivers, 1 quarterback. We're going to go Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, and Michael Penix Jr. Really, really good landing spots for these 2 wide receivers. Ladd McConkey to the Chargers, Keon Coleman to the Bills. Both these guys kind of had flawed profiles as prospects, but they're both going to have really strong opportunities to be wide receiver ones for elite quarterbacks. And then for Michael Penix, one of the tougher guys to evaluate here. The situation overall sucks, and just kind of looking at it, quarterbacks are never guaranteed hits, right? Even the top prospects, they still bust at a decent rate. And the problem with drafting a guy like Michael Penix is he might not get a legit opportunity to play until 2 to 4 years down the road. And at that point, he still might not even hit as an NFL quarterback. So I feel like you're going to draft him. He's just going to rot away on your bench or on your taxi squad. And I do think if you really like him as a prospect, you think he's going to pan out, I feel like there are going to be cheaper times to actually go out and get him. I mean, especially if he's potentially going late round 1, that would, you'd assume, be a contending team, or maybe he's slipping somewhere mid-second round. These are teams who could end up competing and could end up, trading him low just because they need a win-now asset. So I think if you really like him, I'd prefer to not draft him really early second round or late first round. I'd rather, try to look for a trade situation, maybe somewhere during this season or heading into the 2025 season. So that's where I'm at with Michael Penix. Tough situation for him because going 8th overall is amazing. But if it was the Raiders getting him there or another quarterback needy team like the Saints, something like that, it would have been a lot better. Going to the Falcons behind Kirk just, kind of sucks. And then looking at tier 6, a little bit of a bigger tier, we're going to have another running back with Trey Benson. Then we're going to go with some wide receivers, A.D. Mitchell, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette, Ben Sinnott at the tight end position, and then Jalen Polk to wrap up this tier. So starting off with Trey Benson, I like him as my running back too. I had him there heading into the draft. He stays there. Early third round pick to the Cardinals. I feel like there's a pretty, logical path to him being the future starter there in 2025 once James Conner's contract is up. Probably going to be in somewhat of a committee early on, potentially third down back, mixing in for the carries, James Conner, potentially more of the early down guy, potential goal line work. But I think he'll have a role in year 1 and then has the opportunity to expand, assuming the Cardinals move on from James Conner. Then we're going to go with A.D. Mitchell, and not going round 1 did kind of hurt him here. He's going to have to drop a few spots. Also, the landing spot isn't ideal. You're going to have a team with a really strong rushing attack. You already have Pittman there. I'm a big fan of Josh Downs. So you've already got a lot of mouths to feed. Also not sure how the passing volume is going to look there. But I think he's still an interesting option, mid-second round of rookie drafts. Some people may be completely off of him after he fell out of the first. I'm still willing to draft him ahead of some of the players that went ahead of him in the actual draft. A couple of those guys would be Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette. Just being honest, I'm not a huge fan of the fifth-year breakout guys. Both of them would kind of qualify for that. I'd consider them in like the mid-second round, but I think there are people out there who really like, either one or both of these guys. Like I know some people would probably take Leggett, like the 1-2 turn. Same thing with Pearsall. And it just takes one, player in your league to really like them if they're picking late first, early second round, and then they're off the board. So I don't think I'm going to have many shares of these guys. If they fell to me in the mid-second round, I would definitely consider taking them. I'm just not sure if they're actually going to get there. And then we have Ben Sinnott. Really strong athletic testing for a tight end, coming off, two pretty solid receiving seasons. He goes in the second round of the Commanders. I think he's a really interesting option here in the second round, and I think in certain leagues you might be able to get him in the third, which I think would end up just being a great value. And then Jalen Polk here, produced in an offense with two other NFL caliber wide receivers, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan. He goes to the Patriots early round 2. Little surprised he went that early. He's stepping into a pretty wide open Patriots wide receiver room, so it'll be interesting to see which of those guys kind of win out there. You have a few young options. I think Kendrick Bourne still in the mix, Demario Douglas, and then a player Baker we're going to get into a little bit later on in this video. That's tier 6. Now wrapping up the top 24 with tier 7, it's just going to be 3 running backs: Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, Blake Corum. I think I moved a couple of these guys down from my original top 24 video. I actually had all 3 of these guys in the same tier pre-draft, and I think I switched up the order a little bit. I think I had Lloyd as my number 5, Wright as number 3, Corum as number 4, so just kind of jumped Lloyd up to the top of this tier. But all 3 of these dudes got drafted to kind of like ambiguous committee situations. It kind of just feels like the spot where you pick your guy. Like there are pathways for all these guys to pan out. For Marshawn Lloyd, if the Jacobs deal pretty much turns into like a 1-year rental, he could be the future starter for the Packers. For Jalen Wright, he's probably going to be in a committee with Devon Achane, but we saw what a committee with Devon Achane could do last year with him and Mostert, both being RB1s. So the upside's there in that situation, probably after this year, once Raheem Mostert's gone. And then for Blake Corum, right, they have Kyron Williams there, who's coming off a great season, but Corum does some things well. You could see a role for him potentially getting in on the goal line, splitting touches if they don't want Kyron Williams to handle a massive workload. And there's just not a ton of job security for those like later round undrafted running backs. So there's a path for all these guys to find some success, but there's also routes where they kind of just get thrown into like gross committee situations. So like I said, kind of just pick your guy at this point. Late round 2 is where I'd be looking for these dudes. And then shifting into tier 8, this is where we're getting into some of the new guys that I didn't talk about in the top 24 video. Tier 8, we're just going to be 4 wide receivers. We're going Troy Franklin, Jermaine Burton, Malachi Corley, and then Roman Wilson. I'm probably going to be higher on Troy Franklin than consensus. I was high on him heading into the draft. He was my wide receiver 6. Obviously had to move him down after the pretty rough 4th round draft capital. But I think the landing spot's fine. He's going to be paired with Bo Nix again in that Sean Payton offense. It's kind of interesting because I really liked Marvin Mims last year, and Marvin Mims flashed early on as kind of like a potential deep threat, big play guy. That's probably what Troy Franklin's role is going to be, so I feel like it's kind of cannibalizing on a dude I already liked last year, but it seems like the Broncos maybe aren't super in on Marvin Mims. He wasn't able to expand his role, even though he was making some plays. So I think Troy Franklin could definitely work out here, but definitely would have loved to see him have gotten picked on day 2. Then we have Jermaine Burton, who I think is a pretty interesting option going to the Bengals here in the 3rd round. He's a big play threat, over a 20 ADOT and over 20 yards per reception in his final season. He produced in all 4 years, but never put together like a super dominant season. I think he could be a pretty solid complementary weapon here for the Bengals. It could be a very open wide receiver room outside of Jamar Chase. Tyler Boyd's a free agent still. T. Higgins, on the trade block, could be moved. So he has an opportunity to step in wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and that could end up being a decently valuable role for fantasy on this offense. Then we're going to have Malachi Corley, and I think his current skill set is a little bit raw, and I think we need, a little bit of help from the Jets to kind of unlock his ceiling fantasy-wise, because if you just throw him into like some standard wide receiver role, I don't know if he's going to have a ton of success. He was a super low ADOT guy in college, but was great after the catch, so if you can get him touches, I think he could definitely, make some plays. So hopefully they kind of carve out a unique role for him. Maybe he works in on the ground a little bit, Deebo Samuel style, but I think he's kind of a fair option here early to mid 3rd round. And then the final wide receiver here, Roman Wilson, goes round 3 to the Steelers, has a legit opportunity to be their wide receiver 2 in the 2024 season. And then the final tier here, a pretty large tier. We're going JT Sanders, Bucky Irving, Ray Davis, Javon Baker, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey, Will Shipley, and Audric Estime. JT Sanders going in the 4th round, day 3. It wasn't great draft capital-wise, but I actually don't really hate this landing spot to the Panthers. He was a decent prospect, underwhelming athletic testing, but he had 2 pretty solid receiving seasons in college. And we know that Dave Canales, the new Panthers head coach, he likes to have tight ends involved, and he likes to have tight ends involved as pass catchers. We saw last year Cade Otton, the Bucks tight end one, not like some sort of amazing top prospect. Didn't even have a great season, like production-wise or fantasy-wise, but he ran the 2nd most routes out of all tight ends last year. So if JT Sanders is talented enough, as a pass catcher to make plays, I think he will get an opportunity here in this Panthers offense. Not a ton of stud tight ends there. You have Tommy Tremble, who's a really good athlete, but really hasn't done much at all as a pass catcher. So I think Sanders might have an opportunity here and is interesting, but 4th round is a little tough to stomach there. Then we're going to have Bucky Irving. And I think he, outside of Jalen Wright, he's probably the most interesting day 3 running back, maybe him or the guy after him. He has a pretty similar skill set to Rachaad White, who he's going to be sharing a backfield with, and I think that makes this situation interesting because some of these other guys, you can see them filling in as like a committee member where you kind of know what role they're going to have in their offense. But with Bucky Irving coming in here and kind of having a mirrored skill set, it could be that if he can't beat out, Rachaad White for the receiving down role, then maybe he just gets, stuck in like a clear RB2 role. But it's also possible that Rachaad White's strength is in the pass catching, and he didn't have a great season rushing the ball in terms of his efficiency. I think he had the fewest rushing yards over expected of all running backs in the NFL. So even though he had a solid workload, it didn't really, come together production-wise. And so if Bucky Irving can come in, compete for the receiving work, he has a real opportunity to emerge as like the top runner in this backfield, even though he didn't test super well athletically. It's possible. So I think it just is interesting because there is a path to him being the RB1 here. Not saying it's going to happen, but I think that outcome is possible just based on the way these guys' skill sets kind of line up. And then another dude who I think could have a decent impact in year 1 would be Ray Davis. The Bills want to use 2 running backs. I could see Ray Davis stepping in here, getting some early down work, also working in on the goal line. He is the bigger back compared to James Cook. And we saw the Bills just be really reluctant to give James Cook those goal line opportunities. So I think Ray Davis definitely one of the more interesting day 3 picks. Then we're going to go with Javon Baker. He goes round 4 to the Patriots. I think people thought he would go day 2, ends up slipping to day 3, but he is stepping into a pretty wide open wide receiver room. So in other situations, like if you're getting picked day 3, round 4 or later, and you're already kind of stepping into an established wide receiver room, it might be hard to really break into that starting unit without that draft capital, but the fact that the Patriots wide receiver room is so wide open, I feel like it could help him out here, because if he really does have the talent of like a day 2 guy, I think he'll get to showcase it and he'll have an opportunity to win a spot. So I do think he has a clearer path to routes than most of like the day 3 running back picks you would see. And then after Baker, we're going to go with Jalen McMillan. Talked about Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze already. McMillan was delivering solid production in an offense that featured 2 other, very strong wide receiver prospects. I think in the short term, the Bucs aren't a great landing spot just because you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin there kind of locked in as the 1 and 2. But Chris Godwin's on the last year of his deal. Mike Evans has 2 years left. I think he signed that 2-year extension this offseason. But he's also getting up there in age a little bit. So I think maybe it doesn't happen in year 1, but there is at least a path for McMillan to kind of get more involved here in this offense. After McMillan, we're going to be going with Luke McCaffrey, and he's a pretty interesting prospect here. Obviously, brother of Christian McCaffrey, but he started off college as a quarterback. I believe he was at quarterback for his first 3 collegiate seasons, and then he switches to a wide receiver in his 4th season. First year as a receiver, he goes for over 700 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. Then last year, 992 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns. Day 2 draft capital, the Commanders. The Commanders could use a wide receiver 3, maybe a wide receiver 2, depending on if Jahan Dotson kind of steps up. But I also think there's reason to believe that there's some untapped potential here. If he's been, a quarterback pretty much his entire life and was doing that in college and was able to just switch over to wide receiver and find success, he's clearly a very talented athlete, and he could have a lot more room to grow than some of these other rookie picks. So I think he's interesting. round 3, mid to late round 3, I think it's fair to take a flyer on him. And then the final two guys here, two running backs, Will Shipley going to the Eagles in round 4. I feel like this is setting him up to be like the handcuff in 2025 if Kenneth Gainwell doesn't return. It's not a great landing spot, but he's one of these guys where I think he's a good enough pass catcher where he should be able to find some sort of role in an offense. And then Audric Estime, he doesn't go round 4. He ends up going in round 5, but I like the fit with the Broncos here. You do have Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin, but both Javonte and Samaje Perine are going to be free agents after the season. Jaleel McLaughlin is just like the complete opposite archetype of Audric Estime. So I think there's a real shot for him to potentially work in a little bit this year. We know they were fine running like a 3-headed committee last year, so maybe an injury opens something up for him. But I think in 2025, if he impresses at least a little bit here in 2024, I think he could potentially be their early down back as early as next season. So some to look out for. A lot of those running backs are very, very close together. I put out my top 15 running back rankings. So at this point, like late 3rd round, 4th round, you're kind of just going, getting your guys, the players that you feel confident throwing darts on. But that's going to be my top 36 Superflex rankings. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out my wide receiver running back rankings if you haven't already. Going to continue putting out daily content, surrounding Dynasty and then moving into redraft a little bit later on. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.